So you brought us some really thought-provoking and frankly quite concerning information this week.
Yeah, it centers around a student at Columbia University, Mohsen Mahdawi.
A Palestinian student, right. And what really jumped out at me is that he's a lawful permanent resident here in the U.S. legally, and he was arrested, not just arrested, but arrested on April 14th, 2025, while he was actually at his naturalization interview in Vermont.
Exactly. I mean, just think about that for a second. Someone's taking that final step towards becoming a U.S. citizen.
And ends up detained. It's quite a situation.
It really is. And what's fascinating and, well, deeply troubling when you look into Mr. Mahdawi's background is that he isn't someone with, a history of trouble.
Right.
He's been in the U.S. since 2014, got his green card back in 2015. He's a philosophy major at Columbia, was literally about to graduate this May.
Wow.
And he'd even been accepted into their master's program in international and public affairs. Seems like he was really, setting down roots, building his future here.
Absolutely. But there's another side to this, isn't there? He's also been quite active politically.
That's right. He co-founded the Palestinian Student Society there at Columbia. He was a visible leader in pro-Palestinian protests up until March of last year, 2024. At that point, the reporting suggests he sort of shifted his focus towards dialogue instead.
But he remained outspoken, particularly about Israel's campaign in Gaza. I remember seeing him on CBS 60 Minutes back in December 2024. He made some strong statements, even used the term genocide.
And that seems to be, well, the heart of the matter, potentially. The official reason given for his arrest by ICE Immigration and Customs Enforcement was, get this, a rarely used legal provision.
Okay.
It allows for deportation based on potentially serious adverse foreign policy consequences for the United States.
Adverse foreign policy consequences for speaking out. That immediately rings some alarm bells.
It really does. You have a lawful, permanent resident, someone with legal status, engaged in what certainly looks like protected political speech.
Right. Criticizing a foreign government's actions.
And he's being targeted under this justification that seems, well, directly linked to that criticism.
His lawyer, Luna Druby, was pretty blunt about it. She called the arrest in direct retaliation for his activism. And she added, significantly, for his Palestinian identity.
Yeah.
And when you layer on the timing getting arrested during his citizenship interview, it's frankly hard not to see why she'd draw that conclusion. There was even video online of him in handcuffs. It caused quite a stir.
Understandably, the legal pushback was immediate. A habeas petition was filed, the legal challenge against unlawful detention.
Right.
And Judge William Sessions actually granted a temporary restraining order, which stopped ICI from immediately removing him from the country.
Okay, so he's not been deported yet.
Not immediately, no. But his current whereabouts, according to the sources, remain unclear, which, just adds another layer of unease to this whole thing.
And the legal arguments, what are they focusing on?
His legal team is hitting hard on the First Amendment, his right to free speech. They're also arguing his basic due process rights as a lawful permanent resident going through naturalization have been violated.
Okay, let's unpack that due process part a little. The First Amendment angle, silencing political speech, seems clear. But what are the specific due process concerns here?
Well, it's kind of multi-layered. See, as a lawful permanent resident, Mr. Mahdawi has certain rights under the law, both statutory and constitutional rights.
Okay.
Being detained during that naturalization interview, especially using the very specific adverse foreign policy consequences justification, it seems to sort of bypass a lot of the standard procedures,
Right.
the safeguards you'd normally expect in immigration cases.
Like what?
Well, big questions arise about the evidence. What evidence was used to decide his speech would cause these supposed negative foreign policy impacts? Did he get a fair chance to even see that evidence, let alone challenge it? And this particular clause, the adverse foreign policy consequences, one, it's usually kept for really serious stuff, espionage, direct threats to national security. Applying it to a student activist criticizing a foreign government is, well, it's highly unusual.
And this is where it gets maybe even more disturbing. The information you shared suggests this isn't just a one-off case involving Mr. Mahdawi.
No, it seems not. There appears to be a broader pattern emerging. Reports of a crackdown by the Trump administration targeting foreign students involved in pro-Palestinian organizing.
Right, I saw that. At least 4 other college demonstrators facing similar situations. Detention, possible deportation.
Precisely. And adding to that picture, Secretary of State Marco Rubio actually acknowledged publicly that the visas of about 300 foreign students have been revoked. The reason given: alleged anti-Semitism on college campuses.
Okay, now combating actual anti-Semitism is crucial, obviously, no question about that.
Absolutely essential.
But the major concern here, it seems, is whether that justification is being used as a kind of cover, a pretext to shut down legitimate criticism of Israeli government policies.
That's the core worry. Making that distinction is so important.
It really is. Criticizing a government's actions is not the same as anti-Semitism, and it looks like these policies are getting pushback precisely because they seem to be blurring that line.
Exactly. The sources we looked at highlight worries that this approach basically mischaracterizes political activism as bigotry.
And by doing that, it tramples on free speech rights.
That's the argument. And connecting this to the bigger picture, some legal scholars are actually drawing parallels to the McCarthy era.
Wow, McCarthyism, that's a heavy comparison.
It is. But the idea of targeting a legal resident specifically for their political activities, especially criticism aimed at a foreign government, it's being called unprecedented by some.
Deeply worrying.
It suggests willingness to silence dissent based purely on political views.
Which, goes against the grain of fundamental American values. Free expression, open debate. And the political reaction, particularly from Vermont, where Mahdawi was arrested, that's been pretty loud too, right?
Very strong. Senator Bernie Sanders, Senator Peter Welch, Representative Becca Ben Lent, the whole Vermont congressional delegation. They put out forceful statements condemning his detention.
What did they say?
They call it immoral, inhumane, and illegal. Straight up demanded his immediate release.
That's powerful language coming from Congress.
It really underscores how serious they view this situation. It suggests they see it as a genuine threat to civil liberties.
It really does. And it highlights the potential consequences, if this sort of action becomes normalized or goes unchallenged.
Yeah, the strong words from elected officials reflect that deep concern that fundamental American values are genuinely at risk here.
Which brings us squarely to this central theme you wanted to explore, this tension between an Israel first perspective versus an America first one.
Right, because the justification used for detaining Mahdawi, those potentially serious adverse foreign policy consequences, it really implies a specific set of priorities, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, it suggests that his criticism of Israel's actions is being viewed as so detrimental to U.S. foreign policy interests.
That it justifies potentially overriding the rights of someone legally living in the U.S.
Exactly. So it forces you to ask, whose foreign policy interests are truly being prioritized here? If the main concern is preserving a particular relationship with Israel, and that concern is placed above the First Amendment rights and due process of someone residing here.
Then it starts to look a lot like an Israel first approach.
That's the argument. An America first approach, you could argue, would put the constitutional rights and freedoms of individuals within its borders first. Paramount concern.
And the timing, again, arresting him right when he's trying to become a citizen, it just feels particularly striking.
It does. It feels exceptionally punitive, almost like sending a message. Hold these views, and your path to becoming fully American is at risk.
Just as he's trying to fully integrate.
Exactly. And think about the potential chilling effect that could have, not just on other activists, but maybe on anyone who holds critical views on sensitive foreign policy topics.
It sends a message. Keep quiet, or risk your status, your future here.
Which is a very, very concerning precedent to set.
Now, it's also really important, I think, that we touch on Mohsen Mahdawi's own perspective regarding anti-Semitism, because he has been targeted, right, labeled by some online groups like Canary Mission.
Yes, labeled as anti-Israel or even anti-Semitic, which is why looking at what he himself has said is crucial.
Okay.
The excerpts from that 60 Minutes interview are quite revealing. He talks about his reaction to the October 7th Hamas attack, expressed genuine concern, feared the Israeli response would be catastrophic. It doesn't paint a picture of someone inherently biased against one side.
And more pointedly, he talked about an incident during a pro-Palestinian walkout, didn't he?
Yes, he recounted someone yelling awful anti-Semitic things, death to Jews. And Mahdawi said he and other students immediately confronted that person, made it clear those views were not theirs, not part of their cause.
That's a significant action.
It is. And what's perhaps most illuminating is his own quote from that interview. He said, "To be anti-Semitic is unjust, and the fight for the freedom of Palestine and the fight against anti-Semitism go hand in hand because injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere."
That statement directly challenges that simplistic and sometimes weaponized idea that criticizing Israel automatically equals anti-Semitism.
Absolutely. He clearly draws a line between criticizing government policies and hating Jewish people.
And getting that context out there is so vital, isn't it? Because it refutes attempts to just paint his activism with that broad, damaging brush of anti-Semitism.
Right. His own words and actions, as reported, show him actively opposing it, recognizing its injustice.
So the kind of online harassment, the profiling by groups that just slap these labels on activists, it really seems aimed at silencing dissent, smearing people without dealing with the substance of their arguments or their actual beliefs.
It really underscores the dangers activists face in this climate. Being labeled like that can have severe consequences, as Mr. Mahdawi's case demonstrates all too clearly. It fuels an environment where legitimate political speech gets easily and perhaps intentionally conflated with hate speech.
Leading to potentially devastating and unjust outcomes.
Precisely.
So, okay, when we pull all these threads together, the arrest of Mohsen Mahdawi raises some profoundly serious questions, doesn't it?
It really does.
It looks like potential retaliation for political speech. It throws up major red flags about the erosion of civil liberties, First Amendment due process.
And fundamentally, it forces us to confront this possibility that U.S. foreign policy interests, specifically concerning Israel, might be taking precedence over the constitutional rights of people living right here in the U.S.
Which brings back that Israel first versus America first framing. Is one potentially overshadowing the other, especially when it comes to foundational American values?
That's the uncomfortable question this case puts on the table.
So the thought I'm left wrestling with is this. Is using adverse foreign policy consequences in a specific way against a student activist during his citizenship interview. Is that truly about protecting legitimate U.S. national security interests? Or does it signal something else, a dangerous shift where protecting certain foreign relationships trumps fundamental American freedoms? Are we seeing the rights of individuals within our own borders become secondary, forcing us to really ask, what does America first actually mean in practice today?